I did a dental convention a year ago. A woman came up to me and she was weeping so hard she couldn't speak. And I said to her, "You have chronic suicidal ideation." And she nodded. I said, "You didn't know it had a name." Nod. "You just thought you're some kind of freak." Nod. I said, "Well, do you have a therapist back home?" Nod. "Well, when you get home, set an appointment. Tell the therapist everything you learned. And for goodness sakes, tell him you Googled it. Don't tell him you learned it from a comedian."
Hello and welcome to A Doctor's View, a podcast looking at everyday health topics and life through a doctor's eyes. Please note that all opinions are my own and should not replace the advice given to you by your own doctor. I'm Dr. Bolivios. Let's begin. Hello everyone and welcome to this week's podcast, and a very special welcome if you're joining me for the first time. I have a remarkable guest today. He wrote for The Tonight Show for over 20 years. He is a public motivational speaker and trainer who travels the world and has given keynote speeches at multiple TED Talks events. He is a full-time comedian and has thought about killing himself more times than you could possibly imagine. He is quite literally the dead man talking. Mr. Frank King. Frank, welcome to the show.
Yes. Thank you very much. I am in Taiwan, and I took kind of a circuitous route to get here. I'm working a cruise ship doing stand-up comedy.
Very good.
I flew into Hong Kong at the well, I guess not the height of the pandemic, but as the flu was spreading all over China. Of course, Hong Kong they call it a province, independent region. It's not technically China, and certainly not on the mainland. Anyway, long story short, I flew in a half-full airplane to Hong Kong because I think everybody else who was flying into Hong Kong that day decided, fly into the flu zone? I don't think so. Joined a cruise ship, and I mean, there were so few people, Doctor, that I made it through customs immigration under 5 minutes.
Wow.
Into Hong Kong. Got on the ship, and we sailed. Our first stop was to be, I guess that port called our ship last night and said, "Not going to happen."
Okay.
So we had to find another port. We actually found a port in Taiwan to dock. We're docked now. I don't know whether they're not aware of the news or we snuck in before they figured out we were here. But anyway, we're docked in Taiwan. And the question, Doctor, is,
yes,
when I get off in Japan, I was going to get off in Shanghai and fly home, but of course Shanghai is lots of affected people. So they moved us to leaving from Japan. Are they going to let me back in the U.S. when I fly home from Japan on the 15th? I don't know.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's actually quite a question. I don't know. Been following it quite closely over here, and I don't want to give you an answer for that.
Well, I suspect because we left Hong Kong on the 1st of February,
yeah,
we will arrive in Yokohama on the 15th of February, and the incubation period for the flu is 14 days. That will be 14 days, so if there's nobody sick on the ship of the coronavirus, I imagine we'll be able to disembark and fly wherever.
Hopefully
we'll see.
Yeah, we will see.
That's right.
But no, it's going to be quite an interesting journey back, I must say. Frank, you've had an extraordinary life, and in so many ways you've achieved so much with it, to the point where you're traveling around in Taiwan at the moment and on a cruise ship. And
yes.
So for someone listening, it might be very hard to fathom how we can even be discussing something like suicide. So just please tell us your story, how you've come to this point.
Well, and the question, the elephant in the room often is, wait a minute, a comedian talking about depression and suicide, how does that work?
Yes.
I think I'm a good choice. A couple of reasons. A comedian's job is and always has been since the time of the court jester to speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless. And I believe I speak truth to the power of mental illness for those often powerless in its grip. I believe where there's humor, there's hope. Where there's laughter, there's life. Nobody dies laughing.
Yeah.
And 3, depression and suicide run in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. my great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. I'll spare you the details. And I myself, at the height of the recession, after having my income drop off 80% overnight and losing everything we had worked for in 25 years in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, I could tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. That's how close I came. So it gives me a unique perspective on the subject matter. Now, I didn't start out to be a speaker. In December of 1985, the day after Christmas, I became a professional comedian, went on the road in the U.S. It was the beginning of the kind of the middle of the comedy club boom. And my lovely wife, girlfriend then, now wife of 32 years, we were on the road for 2,629 nights in a row, nonstop. That's about 7 years. From comedy club to comedy club. We hold the record, I think, for the longest nonstop comedy club road trip ever.
Wow.
And then went into radio in my old hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina. Got a job co-hosting a morning show on a radio station that was number one in the market at the time. And I was able to drive it from number one to number 6 in 18 months and get fired. One of my proudest accomplishments. And then by then the comedy club thing had kind of busted. And so I went into corporate comedy, speaking after dinner, after lunch, what they call in the U.S. the rubber chicken circuit, because everybody serves chicken at dinner. And I rode that wave until the recession. And I was making really stupid money. And then the recession hit. And then after the recession, those people who booked me to be funny said, look, Frank, we can't afford to pay that kind of money just to be funny. You need a message, some content, some learning objectives. And I cast about for what in the world did I have to teach anybody? And then read a book by Judy Carter called The Message of You, Turning Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career. About halfway through the book, I thought, oh my gosh, I do have something to talk about. I could be a suicide prevention speaker, given all my family and personal experience. And I took some training.
Yeah.
One is called a Working Minds program. It's suicide prevention as a workplace health and safety issue. And then 2 was something called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, is a curriculum that's approved by a number of departments of health in the United States as a curriculum for continuing education for people like veterinarians and dentists and doctors and nurses. Mm-hmm. And so and I rebranded in 2014, began that with my first TEDx talk, where I came out at age 52. Nobody knew, my wife, my family, my friends, that I was depressed and suicidal. I came out on the TEDx stage as depressed and suicidal. And that was the beginning of my rebranding from funny speaker to speaker who was funny.
Wow. So it was actually at the age of 52 that this aspect of your touring started.
Yes, and you find with people who have mental illness, we're really good at covering it up, and it's often a surprise to friends and family. Unfortunately, it's often a surprise after a suicide. I had no idea. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't I see the signs?
Yeah.
But we're really good at covering up I was good at covering it up. My wife's about to hit play on my first TED Talk when it posted on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I said, look, before you hit play, there's half a dozen things you need to know that I don't want you to learn watching YouTube about me.
Gosh. So did you tell her before then, obviously?
Yes, I gave her the 411, as we say in the U.S., information before she hit play. And I just recorded my 5th TEDx, which is a little more lighthearted than the first 4. It's on mental health, but it's called Mental Health and the Orgasm, Treat Your Depression Single-Handedly.
That's quite a title, Frank.
Yeah, I know. It took me 15 TEDx committees to finally get somebody who was willing to let me do that on stage. And I got my first standing ovation at a TED Talk.
Oh, congratulations.
The thing about TED is, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but they're very concerned about, if you state a fact in your TEDx, like 20% of men, something, prostate cancer, something, they want to know, where did you find that number?
I see.
So today I'm in the process, and by the way, the committee was also very concerned about that. So fortunately, they had me a footnote or whatever, list my resources for every time I quoted a fact. So today I've got to take that document and reply to the Big TED with all those resources and citations before they will put it up on YouTube, because they don't want people up there just making up stuff.
Sure.
So it's and back to your original question, I think that's why it works for me as a comedian to
Yeah.
speak on suicide prevention. One, I live with suicidal thoughts, and two, humor makes it a lot easier to digest for the audience.
Yeah. Yes. This can definitely relate to working in a hospital setting. Definitely makes it more palatable sometimes, even if it may seem inappropriate, but actually it does help with our mental well-being.
Yeah, and I don't just bolt on jokes about that. I tell funny stories. Like when I tell the audience, I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. My next line is, spoiler alert, I didn't pull the trigger, which gets a very nervous laugh.
Sure.
And yeah, then I tell him, a friend of mine came up to me after a keynote. He'd never heard me say that before. And he said, hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I said, hey, man, could you try to sound a little less disappointed? So that's the kind of humor, it's real. It happened to me. It's my personal story. It's not just jokes about, because, there's nothing really funny about suicide, thoughts of depression, but there are funny things that happen if you are living with that.
Of course. And when was your first suicide attempt, and what was the lead up to that?
Well, it was that 2010, after my income fell off 80% in the speaking business. And then I wasn't spending money on cocaine and flat screen TVs and Sea-Doos. It was just that we had some negative cash flow and some rental properties. And my house payment in the U.S., we just bought a big farm. We put half the money down,
Sure.
and the payment was still over $2,000 a month. And I just couldn't make the payment. So I had $1 million life insurance policy. And as a lot of people who are contemplating suicide feel, I felt the world would be better off without me, because my wife would be brokenhearted, but she'd be restored financially with $1 million.
Okay.
So it's called a sense of burdensomeness. I felt like a burden, still breathing. If I shot myself, then she'd get the money and she could restore herself financially.
What made you want to stay alive, for want of a better phrase?
Well, I called my insurance agent, having sold insurance as my first job out of college. I knew that my insurance policy had what's called a 24 months or 2 year suicide clause.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that if I pulled the trigger before the end of 24 months, that the insurance company would simply return the premiums to my wife,
Yeah.
and she would not get the $1 million. And I'd had the policy only 22 months. So I had to wait at least 2 months to kill myself. Otherwise, she wouldn't receive the $1 million. So that's what kept me alive, was the thought that I cannot leave her brokenhearted and broke.
Wow.
And so I don't recall it 61 days or 62 days. I don't recall thinking, well, I can do it now. I think the bankruptcy went through, the phone calls from the creditors stopped, and life got just marginally better.
So it was literally at that moment where you had the barrel of the gun in your mouth and you had this epiphany moment that perhaps your life insurance policy wasn't at the 24-month period.
Yes, it's what happens with most people is most people are ambivalent. 8 out of 10 people who are circling up suicide are ambivalent. I was not ambivalent. I had a time, place, and a method. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me, I guess my brain just tossed up the fact, hey, wait a minute, listen, before you pull that trigger, I want to check with your insurance agent, because I don't think the policy's 24 months old yet. Okay. So I called up my agent, and we're chit-chatting away, I'm like, nothing's wrong. And I said, hey, just out of, off the cuff question, how long have you had that policy? He goes, I don't know, I'll check. I can hear him clacking away on the computer keys. And then he comes back and he says, you've had it 22 months, and then it hit him. And I wasn't really calling up to find out how long I'd had it. I was calling up for permission to kill myself.
Gosh.
And he said, no, don't do it. Because he, as an insurance agent, had that conversation, a life insurance agent, had that conversation with a number of other people who completed the suicides, and he had to deliver the checks.
So he knew straight away.
Yes, and he hung up. I talked to him as soon as the TED Talk posted, because I mentioned him in that first TED Talk.
Mm.
And he said, Frank, when I hung up the phone that day, I said to my wife, I think he's going to kill himself. Wow. But again, I think things improved just enough in that 60-day period to where it didn't cross my mind. Now, the irony, doctor, is that I have something called chronic suicidal ideation or chronic suicidality. And it means for people like me and people like me, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small.
Yeah.
And so the fact that I was willing to end my life allowed me to stay alive those 2 months because I knew the pain was finite. I knew at 2 months and a day I could do it. And I think people misunderstand. Often they ask me, why did so-and-so want to die? And my answer generally is, chances are that person didn't want to die. They just wanted to end the pain.
So you think it's actually a bit of a misconception in terms of that someone actually wants to end their life. It's more that they actually want to end the suffering. If they could live a happy life, they'd choose that every time.
Yeah, if they could pull the trigger, wake up the next morning and be happy and not be depressed, I think they would. That would be ideal. I was watching Game of Thrones, and there's one of those families. They would drown the person at some point during the story, and then they somehow revive them back to life.
Yeah,
after they had been dead, and then they came back. If people who are suicidal could do that, come back and be, no longer depressed. Now, the fact that I'm willing to kill myself at any moment is my superpower. It allows me to go on because I know that if things really got really, really bad, I can, open the exit door on the airplane and jump. And, do you know of Ricky Gervais?
Yes.
He's got a show called Afterlife where his wife dies of cancer and he's terribly depressed. He's suicidal. I'm watching the show, and somewhere in the first episode, his boss is trying to cheer him up. And Ricky says, stop. Here's the thing. I'm depressed. If things get too bad, I'll just kill myself. It's sort of my superpower. He says on the show, and I'm like, oh my God, either he lives with what I have or somebody on the staff that writes for that lives with what I have, because that's not a normal human thought. That, if things get too bad, I'll just kill myself as an option.
Wow.
So it's, and oftentimes when I speak, doctor, there are people who come up afterwards who have what I have, chronic suicidal ideation. They didn't know it had a name. They thought they were just some kind of freak. And to find out that they're not alone, the relief for them is palpable.
That was actually going to be my next question in terms of, because chronic suicidality is not something I've come across as a phrase or as a term. And I wanted to know actually how the response was from audience when you described this, and whether people could relate to it and how they approached you afterwards.
I would say almost every time I've spoken, at least one person, sometimes more than one, has come up afterwards with a question. I always do a general Q&A for the audience, and I say, look, I'm going to hang out. If you have a question you want to ask, don't want to ask in front of everyone else, I'll just hang around until everybody gets their questions answered. And oftentimes, at least one person in the audience who comes up has that condition, didn't know it had a name, thought they were some kind of freak. I did a dental convention a year ago. A woman came up to me and she was weeping so hard she couldn't speak. And I said to her, you have chronic suicidal ideation. And she nodded. I said, you didn't know it had a name? Nod. You just thought you're some kind of freak? Nod. I said, well, do you have a therapist back home? Nod. Well, when you get home, set an appointment, tell the therapist everything you learned, and for goodness sakes, tell him you Googled it. Don't tell him you learned it from a comedian. Yeah. And a week later, I got an email from her that said, Frank, I think I was at that conference simply to meet you. You have changed my life, and I cannot say that about a lot of people.
That spurs you on.
Yeah, that's why I do what I do. And that, by the way, is very therapeutic for me. Selfishly, that's great therapy for me, knowing that I've helped someone perhaps steer them just far enough off the path of suicide, they'll live a normal life.
It's lovely to know that actually what you're doing is helping people in so many ways as well, especially so many people who must feel quite lost actually in a way, because they haven't been able to relate to anyone before with this problem.
Yeah, how do you tell somebody that? Telling a normal person that just freaks them out.
Yeah, and it must be the fear of what people are going to say to you afterwards, because I've come across people who've been depressed in the past, and you do get the simple response by others, which is, oh, just be happy, just cheer up, and why are you always so miserable? And it is laughable in a way, because when you when you delve deeper into depression and when you talk to people who have got mental health problems with regards to depression and anxiety, it's not that simple. And I think, you've just described that in a really, albeit different way, one that I haven't heard before, but it's a very different outlook, and it's one that I think does need to be shared.
Well, and when I speak, what I speak on is depression, thoughts of suicide, signs, symptoms, and solutions. So I'm speaking for the people in the audience who have mental illness who can't speak for themselves. And I'm also speaking to the neuronormal people in the audience to educate them, because I say, well, the question I'm asked often, what do I say to somebody who's depressed? Well, first of all, I tell people don't say anything, just listen. B, don't say this. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, turn that frown, upside down, choose joy. Have you tried fish oil? And then I go on to describe what you should say. And the same thing with if someone were to say to you, or you believe they're having thoughts of suicide, what do you say, not say? What do you do, not do? And it's, because, neuronormal people are generally kind and caring and want to help. Sometimes they say the wrong thing. Sometimes they don't say anything because they're afraid they'll say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. That's how I educate when I'm doing a keynote is sort of, and by the way, if I were to give voice to my feelings of thoughts of suicide, my suicidality, to a clinician in some states in the United States, they are duty bound to have me arrested and brought before a judge. And I have to convince the judge not to file an involuntary detention order and lock me down for 3 days without my belt or shoestrings. I've got to convince the judge I'm not going to kill myself, because if you can't, you are locked down for 3 days minimum in a mental health facility if you mention that to a clinician.
I can believe that, actually, for sure, because it must be very, very scary for the person that you're telling in a medical field. I certainly know if you came into the hospital and I was chatting to you and you said, I feel like killing myself every day, I have suicidal thoughts every day, I think I'd have a very difficult time letting you leave the room without having some form of intervention, So, it's, I do understand.
Well, let me give you a couple of questions you should ask at that point. And I created these myself. This is not in the protocol.
Yeah.
If you think somebody's suicidal, you're supposed to ask, do you have a plan? What is your plan? If it's really detailed, then you should,
sure,
get them on the phone with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. But in my case, because I live with that all the time, the question should be after are you suicidal? Yes. Plan? Yes. I believe the question should be, well, are you going to kill yourself? Because I would say no. Why would I kill myself? Because I live with that. And then the follow-up question I think is even more important. Then you should say, well, Frank, tell me why not. Make them give voice to the reason that they're going to stick around. And in my case, I figured it out. It just came to me one night after a speech, thinking about all the people I had helped. I thought, oh my Lord, in the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, I've been shown what these people's lives would be like if I weren't there to speak and let them know they weren't alone. If I kill myself, I would take all those people with me.
So that's the thought that keeps you going.
Yeah. I can't kill myself, doctor. Some friend of mine said, you couldn't live with that. I said, no, man, I can't die with that.
Yeah.
Knowing that there's all these people out there that I'll eventually speak to that I may steer just far enough off the path of suicide they'll live a normal life. So how could I possibly, I got the idea from a friend whose father was in AA for a long time, Alcoholics Anonymous. He sponsored a lot of people. Somebody asked him somewhere along the way, was he going to drink again? He said, no, I'll never drink again. The person said, how do you know that? He said, because of all the people I sponsored and all the people I will sponsor, if I dived back into the bottle, I would drag them into that bottle with me. So that kept him from drinking. And that's what keeps me from killing myself is I just can't die with the thought that there are people out there that I could have helped. When I had a heart attack in the woods in 2014, 2 weeks before my TEDx, I'm in the woods with the dogs, half mile up a trail. I've got T-Mobile, so I don't have cell service. And I know it always gets a laugh no matter where I tell that story. And I have a heart attack. And I've had some heart surgeries in the past, and I knew exactly what it was. It wasn't just angina. I knew it was a heart attack. And so people ask me, when you're coming down the hill back to the car, it was a half-mile walk with the dogs. What are you thinking? Did you see a light? Hear Rose's voices? Or you thinking about your wife? I was thinking? I'm walking down the hill crying because I thought, I'm 2 weeks away from that TEDx talk. If I'm not able to give that talk, think of all the people that will die because they didn't get a chance to hear me speak. That's what I'm thinking about, having the heart attack, getting back to the car. I've got to get back to the car because they've got to hear me speak, because otherwise I've doomed all the people that would have been saved, perhaps, if they could have heard me speak.
It's funny. We often associate suicide with selfishness to some extent, being someone's taken their own life and they've created all this misery behind them. And whilst it's very easy to say, we often don't know the cause behind their thoughts and feelings regarding that. But it's interesting to hear a very unselfish perspective on it, and that's actually the thought that's keeping you alive.
Yes, and as we talked about before, the person who's thinking about suicide, to them it is a selfless thought because they think, well, the world would be better off. My wife will have $1 million. Now, it's not a rational thought. If I were to give her the choice, okay, look, here's the deal. I can stick around and we'll just have to work our way through the bankruptcy, or $1 million. I'm sure she would have said, look, just hang around. We'll work our way through this, which we're still married, which is, bankruptcy either blows a marriage up or makes you stronger. And, but yeah, it's a selfless thought on the person's part who is thinking about dying. They think the world would be better off without them.
And just to, I know we have touched on this and you have actually answered this, but just to reiterate this, it may sound like a strange question, but since your last suicide attempt, you have suicidal thoughts every day. Is that's correct?
Every day. I mean, it's kind of like I liken it to mental music. The music you hear when you go to a department store that's kind of underneath everything.
Sure.
That you don't always notice unless a song comes on you really like or really hate.
I understand.
It's kind of like that. If I pull up to a railroad crossing and a train's coming, I think about it. If I'm driving a mountain road and there's a big drop off on one side, I think about it. Or if my wife gets really mad, I think about it.
And with that, is it these thoughts? Is it the same? Is it the same as wanting to die every day, or is it just the thought that I could do it?
No, it's not wanting to die every day. It's a thought. It's a thought I could do it. Like I said, when the train coming, this is very common. People who have what I have will describe, I'm sitting in the train's coming, and I'm thinking to myself, gosh, if I pulled up on the tracks, that would be that. Or I'm driving and I look ahead and there's a bridge abutment. I turn the wheel just a little bit, I could hit that abutment. Yeah, so it's not an active suicidality. It's not even a passive suicidality. Passive suicidality means, and you hear this a lot, somebody will not take the steps to kill themselves, but they say something like, well, I'm not going to kill myself, but if I didn't wake up tomorrow morning, that would be okay. That's passive suicidality.
Is that almost the predisposition to what you have? Does it then lead on to the chronic suicidality, some symptoms like that, or is that a different thing altogether?
It's a different thing altogether. They are depressed and suicidal, and that can be situational, not necessarily organic. They've gone through a divorce or lost a job or whatever, and that can be, and they're either actively suicidal where they're planning, or they're passively suicidal and would be okay if they didn't wake up. Chronic suicidality is a separate pathology, I guess. If you ask me, you're going to kill yourself, I go, no, why would I kill myself? What are you, crazy? Why would I kill myself? Well, you're suicidal. I'm always suicidal.
So it's something that you've learned to live with. It's a thought that you have. Whilst I can't relate to it, I'm trying to understand it. Would I be far off as saying it's someone who has schizophrenia that always hears voices, and they've learnt that those voices, they're just there, and they might be telling them to do things, but they're ignoring them to some extent, and they know that they're always there, but they're dealing with life the best way that they know how?
Well, and on that score, in some cultures, the hearing voices is not a bad thing in the developed world.
Mm.
Oftentimes, the voices are telling the person to do something self-destructive. There are cultures where, when asked about those voices, a very common response is, I find it comforting because I'm never alone. So it depends on where you are in the world oftentimes. And yes, there are people who come to, and there's a whole slice of folks. I don't know if it's outside the U.S. or not, but in the U.S., there's a whole slice of folks who have schizoaffective or schizophrenia, and they hear voices, and they don't take medication, and they think it's kind of like I do, it's akin to a superpower. They think it's just the way they are wired, that they're not broken. They just have this ability to hear these voices. And so that without medication, that state of mind, feeling about it that way, keeps them alive.
And is it fair to say now that you're using these thoughts, these suicidal thoughts, almost as a tool to help your success? So by that I mean, a lot of people may not do something because there's a fear of failure for it. But because you mentioned
Yes.
in the past, well, if this doesn't work, I can always kill myself. That's always an option. It's always on the cards. Is that a way you're using to help overcome a fear of failure, potentially?
Yes, that was my fourth TEDx talk, which is Suicide, the Secret of My Success, in that I was married and miserable, wonderful woman, but miserable, son in insurance, miserable, not doing comedy, which I thought I was born to do, and miserable, and realized if I don't change something, I'm going to kill myself sooner rather than later, which leads to the second thought, well, what have I got to lose? I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't,
Yeah,
I can still kill myself. And by the way, I've got a client now who was a monk for 20 years and was very good at it, but believed he should be managing money. He had an ability to manage money. Money made sense to him, and he found that people who had problems that came to him, he would pray with them, but he would also help them with financial management. So he realized one day, look, if I don't leave the monastery and pursue becoming a financial manager, I'm going to kill myself. I'll give it a try as a money manager. If it doesn't work out, I can still kill myself. He shared that with me after he saw my fourth TED Talk. He said, Frank, we have more in common than you think. So yeah, it is his superpower. I believe it's mine. Second episode of Ricky Gervais's show, The Afterlife. He's two kids come up with knives, and they say, "Give us your wallet." And Ricky, now bear in mind, he's depressed and suicidal. And Ricky says, "What's going to happen if I don't?" And one of the kids goes, "We'll kill you." And Ricky says, for most people, that would be an inducement to turn over my wallet. Yeah. But, and the kid just, his eyes glaze over, and Ricky hits him in the nose, and that's the end of that. But that's that, go ahead. I've had thoughts just like that. You're someplace, you're thinking about what if this place was robbed and somebody brought in a gun, I want to kill you. And, well, I've been trying to do that for decades. I take your best shot.
One of the reasons why I was so interested in having you on the show is because this season I'm trying to discuss medical topics and medical issues, try and help us become healthier and happier. And when I saw your story and also was listening to some of your TED Talks, and you're explaining how many people were able to relate to this that otherwise wouldn't have said anything, just thought it'd be a very nice thing, as well as having a very interesting guest, believe me. But it's very nice to be able to share this story out with people, just in case they might be suffering from something similar and can seek help or find a way to deal with it as well.
Well, and I got an email a month or so ago from a gentleman in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm 42, I've got a lovely 8-year-old daughter, I'm married, I've got a good job. He said, I cannot tell you the last time that I was happy. And he said, I thought I was completely alone. And then I stumbled across your TEDx talk. And I realized, and then he reached out to me by, he sent an email or whatever, comment to my YouTube page, which I always respond to. Yeah. And I am the first person that he has ever told that to. And I encourage him when he's ready. A gets him therapy. B, see about medication, and C, when he's ready, share this with his family so they can be, part of his support and self-care plan.
Yes.
So it's if you don't mind me plugging a book,
no,
we have
please
a book coming
do.
out.
I wanted to talk to you about that actually, so please do.
Yeah, it's called Guts, Grit, and the Grind. Guts, Grit, and the Grind: A Men's Mental Mechanical Manual. And the website is Guts, plural, Grit, singular, Grind. GutsGritGrind.com, and that's the website. And with two women, the woman whose idea it was is a suicide prevention trainer for first responders, police, fire, and so forth. And she went to the bookstore looking for a book on men's mental health, because in the United States, 8 out of 10 people who die by suicide these days are men. And she couldn't find anything. And she went online, Amazon, she couldn't find it. So she thought, I'll write a book. It's an anthology. It's the stories of men with a problem and how they're coping, in hopes that another man would pick it up, thumb through the index, find his problem, and see how another guy was coping, because men tend to take advice from men.
Yeah.
And so what began as a one-book project turned into 800 pages, because we had 50 some odd men contribute stories. So this is volume 1. And again, because men tend to be very closed-mouthed, because, they're trained that way. They grow up that way. Big boys don't cry. It's called toxic masculinity. They've been trained not to share, because that's not what men do. We're hoping we can sort of crack that wide open and give men permission. We figure a lot of women will buy the book because they've got a man in their life with a problem, and they'll thumb through the index, find the problem. It's not just stories, also clinical resources and exercises and suggestions on how to deal with these problems.
Yeah. And
two ladies contacted me, said, would you make it funny? And would you add the automobile metaphor? Says it looks like an automobile owner's manual. Because we figured that way a guy would pick it up. And I said, wait a minute. You two ladies are writing a book on men's mental health. Don't you think you need an author who is, I don't know, a man? So they made me a co-author, and I'll voice the book for Audible. That was my deal. I want to be a co-author, and I want to voice the book for Audible.
That's fair enough. I think, look forward to it, actually. And for listeners out there who may be feeling for the first time in their lives that this is the first time that they are relating to something like this, and the first time they may have heard of this condition, what would you advise for them?
Well, if they, I imagine you'll put this in the show notes. My website is thementalhealthcomedian.com, and all my contact information is there. And The Mental Health Comedian is my social, Facebook, whatever, LinkedIn, Instagram. And I would say, if you are struggling, make sure you get evaluated and find out exactly what it is you have. And then consider medication. I didn't take medicine until I was 60, and 3 weeks after I started, I'm thinking, why in the heck did I wait? And then share when you're ready. Share with your friends and family. Begin to build a support system. That's what the book talks about. It's kind of like car maintenance. You want to keep the car running well, it needs scheduled maintenance. And you need to prepare ahead for things that might go wrong. You join the auto club in case you have a flat. It's a rainy, dark night and you're stuck on the highway somewhere. So you join the auto club. And in the trunk, you've got a first aid kit. So we compare it to maintaining your car and driving safely, because there's so many things that sort of cross over. Here's my favorite. Don't you wish the man in your life had a check engine light? And it goes on, and he goes to see the mental mechanic, and the mental mechanic goes, Bob, no wonder you're depressed. You're 2 quarts low on serotonin. Wouldn't it be nice if that were the case? And if men took care of their cars like they take care of their brains, they better go ahead and buy a bus pass, because they're going to be walking. That's the whole, the sort of the flavor of the book. And please put my phone number in your show notes.
Yes,
it's
I
in
will.
the U.S., but if you were... Yeah, because I tell people at my keynotes, look, if you're suicidal, call the Suicidal Lifeline or whatever the equivalent of it is in the country where you are.
Yes.
Most countries have Samaritans in some countries, and it's the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now there's a text line for younger people.
Yep.
If you're just having a really bad day, call a crazy person like me. And I put my phone number up on the screen because, yeah, we're less likely to be judgmental. We're just going to listen.
Yeah.
And I had a guy call me one time, and he goes, "Oh my God, this is really your cell phone number." And I said, "How bad would the karma be for me to put a number up there that wasn't my number? Oh my God!" I said, I could make it even worse. Here's a comedian kicking in. Hold, please. And then the on-hold music was, another one bites the dust, and another one gone, and another one gone, another one bites the dust.
I was just thinking of all the ways you could
like,
have fun with that, and I just thought that's not right.
Oh, God. Oh, Lord. And how bad the karma would be. But, yeah,
Gosh.
People call me, people email me, people text me, people Facebook message me. Even my friends who have a friend or loved one, they'll send me a note saying, "Look, would you check out this guy's Facebook? He's saying things in his post that make me nervous. Tell me if I should be worried." So I go to the Facebook page, I read his post, and I go right back, "Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to be worried. You need to reach out to him or her and see what's up."
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, Doc. The people who are suicidal, generally, 90% of them will give hints. We'll give hints in the 1 week leading up to an attempt, either verbal, nonverbal, direct, indirect, or behavioral hints, because 8 out of 10 people want somebody to step in and interrupt. That's the good news. You can make a difference. You can save a life, and you can do it oftentimes by doing something as simple as you and I are doing, and that's a conversation.
Yeah.
Suicide is the most preventable cause of death on the planet, and anybody, you don't have to be a professional, anybody can help stop a suicide.
I think that's quite a poignant thing you've just said, actually. We always associate mental illness, mental health, and depression, anxiety with needing, you have that vision of straitjackets and hospitals and doctors' clinics, but it does start with being able to just have a chat or being able to acknowledge that someone close to you is actually not feeling quite right. And like you said, it can be disguised very, very well by people. And I've seen it being disguised very, very well by people. So being able to pick up on the little clues is good.
Yeah, pick up on the little clues. And I tell my audiences, look, I'm not a clinician. This is not a therapy.
Sure.
All we are seeking to do with what I'm teaching you is to plant a seed of hope. It just takes a seed of hope to turn people around and keep them from ending their lives.
I think that's lovely. And I think it's, if more people actually did that, I think we could save a lot of lives actually in the long run.
Yes. If we could make people comfortable about giving voice to their feelings about, their suicidality, because you always hear this, died by suicide, never said anything. I can't believe, we talked about this at the beginning. I can't believe I didn't notice anything. Why didn't he say anything? I would have done anything for him. But if you know what to look for, and by the way, for your listeners, signs of depression, difficulty getting up in the morning, rallies in the afternoon, less of personal hygiene, is a big sign of sleep too much, can't sleep, eat too much, can't sleep. Those are all signs that they're struggling.
It's something I've actually done shows on last year regarding burnout and depression, especially within medical fields. It's quite rife within medical fields, and so I think it's actually important to other clinicians as well, just to pick up on cues for colleagues and friends and family as well.
Yeah, doctors in the U.S., one physician in the U.S. dies every day of suicide.
I didn't know it was that high in the U.S. actually.
Yep, and then followed by dentists and veterinarians.
Have you given many talks too within hospital settings?
I've done more with dentists. Just now beginning, I'm doing in March the Oklahoma Medical Society, because the talk that I give, 1 to 3 hours, in the U.S. counts towards CME, continuing medical education.
Yes.
So it's just a bonus for coming to my keynote. You're going to get some, continuing ed credit. Same with dentists. I have a 3-hour CE for dentists. The state of Washington, by the way, in the U.S. has mandated that every healthcare professional must have 3 to 6 hours of suicide prevention training to renew their licenses in 2020. Every one of them.
Wow. I think that's something we should do in the UK, actually.
And I think other states, Washington sometimes leads the pack with things like that. The woman who lost her husband rallied some other folks who had, in the suicide prevention business, and they got pushed through the legislation. And so all the 5,000 dentists and 6,000 hygienists have to have 3 hours of suicide prevention CE, or they can't renew their licenses.
That's a very good idea.
And it's not just for the dentist or the hygienist, it's also for the patients, because patients sit down and tell, I've told my dentist things I haven't told my wife yet. That's something about getting in that chair. I don't know. Can I leave you with one last story? When I was in the woods and I was having a heart attack, people think if you're depressed and suicidal, it's 24/7, 365. That's not the case. My good days outnumber my bad days. And it occurred to me, if I wanted to die a very socially acceptable death, and I'd been in a bad place that morning, I could have sat down on the trail, let the heart attack run its course, and only the dogs would know that I chose to die. When they found me, they just think, oh, he had a heart attack. He's got T-Mobile. He's got cell service. He couldn't get out of the woods. And that would be very socially acceptable. But I was in a good place. I wanted to live. I had to deliver that TED Talk. I had to get the dogs back to the car because there's a busy road on the other side of the car, and I can't have them running up and down the. So, yeah, it's another misconception that we're that way all the time.
No, that's fair, and that's a fair point to say, and that's a nice thing to let people know about as well. That even people with this condition, chronic suicidality, and they do still have happy days and good moments in their life, which is lovely to know as well.
Yeah, I'm a happy guy. Most of the time it's like a cycle. It's like a flat spot on a wheel. Every now and then the flat spot hits the road, and I'm down for a couple of days, but then it cycles back up.
You definitely you've definitely made me laugh, and you've also educated me as well in many ways. So thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Frank, thank you so much. It's been absolute joy to have you on the show. I think just the fact your story is incredible, and you've gone through heart attacks. You've gone through, as you said, being able to taste the barrel of the gun in your mouth, and yet here you are. You're laughing, and you're making other people laugh and helping others. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
Thank you for having me. It helps keep me alive because, we're helping people.
Our pleasure. Anytime. Thank you very much. That was the wonderful Frank King. If you'd like to see more of his talks, please do visit the YouTube links that can be found in the podcast description, as well as details on how to contact Frank. It goes without saying that if you're listening and are struggling with depression or are having suicidal thoughts, please do seek medical and professional help right away. And with that, I will leave you for this week. If you are enjoying the show, please leave a review, and don't forget to click the subscribe or follow button to make sure you don't miss out on future episodes. And if you'd like some behind the scenes posts, please do follow me on Instagram. Just search for A Doctor's View, and feel free to contact me with any topics that you would like me to consider for the show. As always, please look after yourself. I'm Dr. Bolivios. Goodbye.